Something huge is happening across Africa. You could call it a geopolitical earthquake. Old alliances that have been in place for decades, sometimes even a century, are starting to crack and fall apart. And in their place, a whole new set of global powers are jumping in, all trying to gain influence. Today, we're going to dive into this massive shift and figure out what it all means, not just for Africa, but for the rest of the world too.
So it really makes you wonder, are we watching a new scramble for Africa play out in the 21st century? This time, though, the prize isn't about grabbing colonial territory. It's about influence, it's about resources, and it's about locking in strategic partnerships. But here's the crucial difference. This time around, African nations are the ones in the driver's seat, picking and choosing their partners.
All right, let's kick things off in the Sahel, which is really ground zero for this whole geopolitical tremor. This is a region where, for decades, countries relied heavily on the West, especially France, for military and political support. Well, that's all being torn down pretty decisively in favor of some new and, frankly, pretty unexpected alliances. And if you want to understand just how high the stakes are, you have to look at Burkina Faso. I mean, the country went through 2 coups in 2022 alone. The current leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has since reportedly survived more than a dozen different attempts to either kill him or overthrow him, including a really serious plot that was stopped just this past January. And this latest plot, it was incredibly bold. The goal wasn't just to take out President Traoré. They were apparently trying to wipe out the entire military leadership and knock out a critical drone base that's essential for their fight against insurgents. And the alleged mastermind behind it all? The very same guy Traoré kicked out of power, Paul-Henri Damiba, who was supposedly directing the whole thing from exile in Togo. And this is where you see how these plots really work on the inside. The authorities say a senior Air Force officer admitted to taking almost $15,000 to be part of the plan. He was getting his orders directly from the exiled former president, of all things, through a messaging app. And his main job was to target that vital drone facility. It just goes to show you how fragile the situation really is. But wait, the story gets even crazier. The government in Burkina Faso is making a really serious accusation. They're claiming that a big chunk of the money for one of these operations, $125,000, came from their neighbor, Ivory Coast. And Ivory Coast happens to be one of France's closest allies in the region. Now, Ivory Coast denies it, but just making the accusation ramps up the tension between these two countries big time. You see a very similar story playing out right next door in Niger, and the contrast is just stark. You have France, the old colonial power, getting shown the door. We're talking troops expelled, diplomats kicked out. At the exact same time, Russia is getting a warm welcome. Moscow just sent its first permanent ambassador in 30 years. They're sending military support, and they're even talking about nuclear cooperation now that Niger has taken back control of a big uranium mine from the French. This isn't a small adjustment. It's a complete 180 on foreign policy. So, while this hunt for new security partners is going on, there's another major shift happening in the background, this time on the economic front. And here we're seeing a quiet but very real challenge to the dominance of the US dollar. And it's being led by China with its currency, the yuan. Now, let's put this into perspective. You look at the numbers, and the yuan is less than 2% of all the currency reserves in the world. I mean, that's tiny compared to the US dollar. But focusing on that global number misses the real story. The real story is about the strategic moves the yuan is making. And right now, Africa is the key battleground for China's ambition. And we can see this happening in very real ways. In Zambia, which is a huge copper producer, Chinese mining companies can now pay their taxes in yuan. Then you have Kenya, which just restructured a massive $5 billion railway loan into yuan, a move that's expected to save them hundreds of millions of dollars. And now Ethiopia is in talks to do something similar with its own debt. These aren't small tweaks, these are major strategic moves. So why are they doing this? Well, the logic is actually pretty straightforward. For one, China is already a huge lender to many of these countries, and it's also the biggest customer for their commodities, so switching to the yuan just kind of makes sense. But it also means they depend less on the US financial system, and for nations that are feeling the pressure from things like US trade tariffs or changing policies, that idea is very, very attractive. Okay, for our final deep dive, let's head over to Sudan. What's happening there with its most valuable resource? Gold could have a massive impact on its economy and maybe even its devastating civil war. The scale of the problem here is just staggering. Look at this. Out of about 70 tons of gold produced in Sudan in 2025, only 20 tons were actually exported officially.
So what happened to the other 50 tons? Well, it was smuggled out or just disappeared. And the profits from all that smuggled gold are fueling a brutal conflict that's created one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet. And that's where Saudi Arabia enters the scene. This move is a key piece of its huge Vision 2030 plan. The Saudis know they need to move their economy beyond oil, and investing in Africa's gold market is a smart play to make sure they remain a global economic powerhouse, even in a post-oil world. For Sudan, this is a massive strategic pivot. For years, most of its gold went to the United Arab Emirates, but that entire route was riddled with smuggling. On top of that, Sudan's military government is flat out accusing the UAE of funding the rebels they're fighting against. So this new deal with Saudi Arabia is a chance to finally formalize the gold trade, bring billions of dollars back to the government, and find a new political ally in the region. And this quote from Sudan's de facto leader about the UAE-led peace talks really tells you everything you need to know about the level of mistrust. He's basically saying, how can we trust you as a mediator when we accuse you of arming our enemies? That complete political breakdown is a huge reason why Sudan is making this economic pivot towards Saudi Arabia. So we've seen military shakeups in the Sahel, we've seen economic power plays with the yuan, and we've seen a resource pivot in Sudan. So let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture. What does it all add up to? The pattern here is unmistakable. Whether you're in Ouagadougou, Nairobi, or Khartoum, the underlying story is the same. African nations are taking control of their own foreign policy. They are strategically choosing new partners, like Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, that they believe will better serve their own goals. And every one of these moves marks a significant chipping away of traditional Western influence, a trend that's probably only going to speed up. And all of this brings us to the fundamental question, right? Are we watching a new dawn of African sovereignty, a chance for these nations to finally call their own shots on the world stage? Or is this just swapping one set of foreign patrons for another, trading in one set of strings for a new, maybe more subtle set of strings? The answer to that question is going to define the future of the entire continent.